users will only like tell you that they need a faster horse, and we need to be talking like thinking about cars. So like that's all fine. We're going to be doing our own ideation, and the fact of the matter is that you can't think of cars until you've heard users complain about that they need faster horses. So that needs to happen. That like that you can't skip that step.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anastasia. I run all things startups at Notion, and welcome to Founders Fridays, where we sit down with builders who've been in the trenches building their startups to talk shop, product design, and really real lessons that no one gonna usually puts on the pitch deck. So today, our guest is Yana Welinder, Harvard-trained lawyer turned product builder, YCLM, and she's the founder of Kraftful, the AI Copilot helping 50,000 product teams mine their user feedback. Yana, super excited for you to join us for today's episode.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I think usually when we start our conversations with founders for this series is we always want to go back to rewind the tape and see the journey that you are on today. Where did it all start? So if we think about it, you started on a legal track, your journey, your career. What convinced you to leave the legal track and dive into product?
Really wandered into law by mistake in some sense, because it is sort of, intellectually stimulating and seemed interesting and things like that. But and then I, turned out to be really good at it, which made it really hard to realize that it wasn't the best fit for what I was doing. But one indication was that I was always building products or designing things on the side. And so one thing I did kind of fairly early in my legal career is I taught myself how to code, and I built a product and applied to Y Combinator. I didn't get in, but I think it did set my course towards entrepreneurship and product. Just even in the very kind of first part of my legal career. But once I was at Wikimedia, I was more sort of in a sort of a leadership role. I led law and policy teams there, and I had the opportunity to pursue more product work, more from a leadership perspective. I led a strategy team, and I also got to lead one of our product rollouts. And I got to do those two things simultaneously, and I loved it. And that was sort of I think that was the last thing that pushed me to like throw in the towel or throw in the gavel and be like, I'm done. I'm going all in on product, burn the ship.
I love that. I'm always curious, founders that are coming from such like unconventional background or completely like opposite from what they're doing right now. Are there certain habits or mental models that comes from law that you still keep close to your chest when building Craftful and when building your company?
I often think back to like when I was a lawyer and realized that I mostly what I did was I practiced law as a PM rather than PMing as a lawyer. Like I always focused on like the problem at stake instead of just applying legal frameworks. I brought very little with me, to be honest. But lately, I realized that there's actually something that has been helpful in some of the work that I'm doing, which is that being having been a lawyer, being legally trained, there's this kind of like logical, precise writing that's actually really helpful for prompt engineering. There's something about kind of like constructing a document that's only supposed to be interpreted in the context of what you have in the document and be super clear and sort of logical, and cover everything. That's very similar to when we were talking to a large language model and and making sure that like everything is communicated in a super clear and precise way.
I mean, I'm curious if you think about back then in the early days, what was that customer pain point that kind of nagging at you really hard enough for you to be like, okay, I'm gonna quit if I'm done and I'm just gonna build something of my own. And it's not gonna be a legal field.
So at IFT, I had sort of a really interesting role in that I led our product team, but we were also selling to product teams. And so I got the opportunity to like travel with our sales team and meet. product leaders, like CPOs, VPs of product of some of our more kind of the bigger enterprise customers, and they wanted to talk to me because at the time there was a lot of connected hardware that was coming onto the IFT platform, and they wanted to learn from me how to make their digital experience more engaging. But for me, the one thing I keep hearing over and over again and sort of became a realization is that the reason a lot of the connected hardware experiences are so bad is that that part of the experience is completely outsourced to agencies that are building that experience as a one-off experience and then throw it over the fence, and it isn't iterated on, it's not improved on the way other products are with, analytics and all the stuff that, like, the PMs in my circles were all very used to. And so it was sort of like this realization that all these experiences were technically speaking so similar that this is like a perfect place to create standardized experiences and essentially create what was going to be sort of a web flow for IoT, which was
Mhm.
my idea that I entered YC with, to help all these teams ultimately build better products. That was our mission. So that was the idea that I was sort of like, okay, I got to go and pursue this because it's clearly like I see this. I sit at the middle of this space and I keep seeing this pain point over and over again, and it's so obvious to me. I should I should I should utilize that and go and fix it.
Nice. So the true calling, but you mentioned that was an original idea of Kraftful, the one that you enter YC. So, but correct me if I'm wrong, that was not where you end up today, right? So what was it like what was the signal that told you it was time to shift and the original idea was no longer the one that you wanted to pursue?
So we actually had a few pivots along the way, and the kind of the biggest was that we ended up pulling out the analytics that powered our standardized user experience, and that became our product. And when we rolled that out, that was sort of around the same time that OpenAI launched, or like right after they launched their API. And so we ended up including a GPT powered qualitative feedback analysis feature inside of this big, broader analytics package. And um, and at some point, it was very clear that we're getting this pull from both from like our IoT crowd, but really product teams outside of that audience really wanted to get that one feature, even though it was sort of like very bare bones. To the point where I was like, okay, this is clearly like that direction we need to go in, and I knew that that was sort of like the signal to pull the trigger.
If you think about like the founders that are maybe listening or watching this, or just like the early days of grind, going through the pivot is not always easy, right? You have to convince the team, you have to convince your investors. Like, how did you handle that?
Yeah. So one thing we did very early on was to build an MVP to validate, and it was very scrappy MVP that we launched with. But even before building anything at all, even that scrappy MVP, I did this one thing that I kind of call the MV pitch, and I ended up going to this. Uh, Conference called Masters of Scale Summits, which is this like really high quality um, crowd. That was the pivot was on my mind just like when the conference happened, and what I ended up doing was kind of just like introducing myself as if we had already pivoted. And interestingly, folks would just start telling me about their related pain points, like unsolicited. It was just like so clear that okay, I'm getting validation just right here. If I had a link to send them, they would go and sign up and pay. This is like clearly something to go with. And I took all of that feedback, summarized it, wrote it up to my team, and shared it with the team as sort of like here's more validation. In addition to what we're seeing from like our one feature that's out in the market, here's what I heard from folks at this conference.
Yeah, it's awesome how you like were able to like create that mental model in your head and be like, I'm just gonna go with it and I'm just gonna say it It is not it yet, but that's what the direction I'm going and, get all the feedback, and I think a lot of times founders don't do that enough in terms of asking questions, doing their research before launching, and, um, I think it's critical to doing even your user research before there are your users, right? To understand, like, if you're solving the real problem in the market and, like, is there validation, is there space for you in the market for that? I love that. I think, like, I'm just curious to understand in general, like, if we zoom out, the user feedback problem or, the gathering of it is so critical, but why do you believe it's sometimes, like, often, underutilized, and how it can become a true asset for the product teams?
It is yeah, it is really critical. Like users users can't tell you what to build, but they can tell you what their pain point is, right? And I think like knowing that pain point, you're not going to know what to build without fully understanding the pain points. The reason it's underutilized is that people get busy, right? And sort of just forget about what's really important. And there's all the stuff that's happening with the team. You got to coordinate critical teamwork, write documents, manage app, do all the things that are sort of like feel really high priority in the day to day, and no one really knows how much you talk to users to define the product that you like documented in a product document. Like as a founder, you have this perspective that the only way I can get this company off the ground and the only way I ultimately got the company off the ground was by talking to users. That's like you have to do it. And so founders know that is really, really important. I think a lot of PMs come in sort of after the fact once there's once you've gotten it to some level, and then there's like some amount of optimization that needs to happen so that like very fresh start problem is not as necessarily as visible to PMs. I know that as having been a PM, I know this to be true. Like it's just you don't understand just how critical it is in some ways. Like you may have read about it and things like that, but it's like you haven't felt it, you know. And the last thing I would add is that I think that as a result, there's a lot of like people start justifying it, and sort of like, well, users will only like tell you that they need a faster horse, and we need to be thinking about cars, so like that's all fine. We're going to be doing our own ideation, and the fact of the matter is that you can't think of cars until you've heard users complain about that they need faster horses. So that needs to happen. That you can't skip that step.
I'm curious to kind of go inside Craftful or just like in your mindset and how you think about the pipeline of the user feedback, because there's a lot of different stages, right? Like, how do you actually turn the raw comments, so you have to collect them, into actionable insight that can use with your team?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we use Kraftful for all of our feedback from support tickets, call transcripts, survey data. We have our own survey product, practically speaking, so Kraftful takes all that data and for each piece of feedback, it extracts insights. So it extracts things like feature requests or complaints, or for call transcripts, pain points because they're not necessarily complaining about an existing product; they're talking about pain points they have. So we have a few different category types that we're extracting, and then it groups that with similar types of insights. So it takes all the feature requests that are about a similar topic and groups them all together and normalizes that request so that it sort of gives you an average request of all of those similar requests. And then it maps it to all of those requests in the original data so that you get both so you get a count of like how many times did this come up, and also so you can click through and learn more context in the original data to see what did people say in this call transcript, what did people say in this app review. And then as a final step, it also takes so say this was mentioned in like 300 different comments, it then takes those comments and creates deep dives so you can see there's like 50 of these comments wanted this particular thing, and like 300 or 100 of them wanted this other thing. with respect to the same topic. And then we have other ways to make it actionable by it's a one click to then turn it into a user story that then syncs to Jira or Linear, and you can turn it into PRD.
Totally. It sounds like it's templatizing things, but also like streamlining the whole process and like automating and saving the time, the resources. But when you're in early days, like what would you recommend for founders in terms of like habit building? Like what kind of habits that they should start building from the early days, very lightweight that they can adopt today to really keep the customer voice in their product development.
Assuming you already have a product out there and people are using it, then the um, support channel is usually the best way to try to start gathering feedback. And so I always, even to this day, even now we now kind of have many thousands of users. I really try to stay close to support so that I can jump in and chat with users, mostly so that I can resolve their pain point really quickly, and then I can ask them if they wanna jump on a call, right? So sort of like like an entry point, because a user who's already complaining about something, if you can get them happy, then they're gonna be willing to, like, talk versus trying to get trying to schedule, conversations with users. So I think just, like, trying to catch them in the flow as much as possible, and then having surveys in the product is another, good way to make sure to capture, feedback. We have a survey product that does two things. One, it generates questions with AI based on a topic of interest or past uh, insights. But the other is a essentially a user interview that's asked questions on the fly based on what the user responded. And I think one thing that's been really interesting to see is that seeing both of those two in action, the user interview tends to um, return like 10x response rates compared to the other one, because users just really like to talk about the things they like to talk about. So just giving people the option to share freely versus having it be canned, like, and I think in a bigger company you may not care about that as much, right? Because
Mhm.
you don't want to capture as many people as possible the same way. Like, it doesn't matter if you have millions of users, but in the very beginning it does matter. And so like then picking this kind of like free form approach may be a really important piece.
Yeah, that's interesting. Providing them, the time and the space to share, sounds like very important. And obviously, like I know that's kind of a YC mantra. You have to talk to your users, right? So every YC founder is very
Yeah.
much trained on that. But this is just one side of building the company. To pivot a little bit of our conversation and kind of get under the hood a little bit, and how do you run your startup day to day? Maybe you can give a little bit of context in terms of like the size of your company, where are you at now? And then I know you build public, right? So I follow you on LinkedIn, so it's very transparent. I love all your posts; it's super engaging. You kind of report out into the world of what you're doing to keep yourself um, in chat. But how do you design that flow and that work stream? Like, what's your tool stack? Like, how you work with your team?
I've gotten pretty good at identifying like what are my areas of strengths, and what part of the business am I critical to. And so I stay closely looped in on things where I know I'm really needed, like product, talking with customers because I'm needed in product, right? Like, otherwise I'm going to be useless in product if I'm not talking to customers all the time. So I think it's like kind of that, like, just being very cognizant of where am I needed and where am I not.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Knowing your strength, and I think it's very hard sometimes for founders to take that step back and delegate. But that's where, I think the knowledge in terms of like hiring the right people as your thought partners is very important. Um, what is your like operating cadence in terms of how you run your day to day, weekly with the team?
One thing specifically about kind of being an AI startup, we're running really fast. We're guided by a clear long-term vision, and even clear super short-term goals. They are short-term. There we don't have OKRs, we don't have quarterly planning, we definitely do not have longer-term roadmaps. Most things happen at a sprint by sprint basis. So we do have weekly sprint planning, and we have sprint retros, and those actually are only standing meetings. We have even our stand-ups, our daily stand-ups are actually Slack ups, so they happen via Slack. We try to minimize meetings as much as possible so that it is, um, you like if you have anything that you want to chat with someone, you bring it to Slack, and then it's only if you kind of feel like this would should be a conversation that you then start the Slack huddle.
And what is the size of your team now?
We're 5 people, so we're still very, very small, which is kind of like helps a lot in, um, yeah, keeping things fluid, keeping everyone on the same page.
Totally, and I mean, like, I think you mentioned in the age of AI, we're definitely seeing the trend, like, smaller teams shipping larger scope projects, like, with all the tools that are available. It's kinda like a good segue maybe in terms like, going a little bit deeper into your tool stack. You mentioned Slack, obviously you use
Mhm.
Kraftful. What other, tools that are kind of indispensable for you for, like, knowledge management or keeping the team on track, especially if you don't have a lot of meetings?
So we definitely use Notion, of course. And yeah, so as you mentioned, we use, Kraftful, we do use Slack. We use Slack a lot, I will say, so both in terms of just like both in terms of in the obvious ways, but we also have our support channel feed into Slack, which means that anyone at any point in time can jump in and chat with customers via Slack, which is how I can do that too. But
Mhm.
it also means that anyone else on our team can do it, and that's really helpful. Um, I'd say we use Figma a lot and have been experimenting with a lot of their new AI tools. Have been using Figma Make quite a bit. We've been lately experimenting with just like a lot of different AI tools for different purposes. So have been using a lot of the prototyping tools, so
Uh-huh,
like things like Bolt, Lovable, Figma Me.
uh-huh.
Have been using a lot of like the video generation tools more for like collateral. So use like HeyGen and more recently Google Flow to some extent. So really kind of experimenting with a lot of tools. I think like not all of them end up sticking or being like a core part um, of our stack. I will say that just using a lot of AI tools is helpful. Like it means that we can make a whole lot of progress, and sometimes we just have to, right? Because we're 5 people and
Totally.
we serve over 50,000 teams, right? So like we kind of
Yeah.
we need that AI amplification to be able to handle it.
So it's kinda serves as an extension of your team. Thinking maybe back and with all the capabilities and all the tools that we have right now, if you were starting from scratch today, whether it would be
Mhm.
craftful or maybe in general as a founder, what would you do differently?
One thing we did well when we pivoted to our latest product, we scrapped all the code and built from scratch, and so we ended up building a completely like AI native, or I would say LLM native solution. We didn't bolt it onto anything. It was like that was it. And I think that was very successful. If we were starting today in 2025, we there would be other ways we could be like completely LLM native, like agentic native, you know. that and so that's something I would do, just like rethink everything from scratch in terms of like what we use, how we build, like what are all the different ways so that it would be just like even more efficient, more seamless, more streamlined. I think the other thing is just like being going really fast was really important because there's definitely been times when it made sense to kind of like build more in stealth and build bigger like bigger things and like being more kind of like go deep. And I think that now, if you do that, oftentimes you will have missed the boat. And so just like shipping in small slices is really important, I think, with AI, unless you're like training a foundational model. You clearly need to be in stealth for a long period of time. That's fine.
Yeah.
But like if you're building experiences, then I think it is just like shipping quickly, iterating rapidly is really, really important.
Yeah, like the speed and the velocity of it really, really matters in the startup world, especially in today's world with when everything's changing so fast, right? And the speed of
Yeah.
iteration. Um, and maybe the last question for me is your single best piece of advice for a first time founder. What would that be?
Yeah. I think like I would say pay attention to your emotional runway. YC has this saying that like startups most startups don't die because they run out of money. They die because the founders run out of motivation. And that I think it's really hard to appreciate until you're there, just like how true that is, that it's sort of like it all hangs on the founder. And so if the founder burns out, it just gets really tricky. And so that's something I would say. It's sort of like pay attention to that early on, figure out the support network you need to be able to do it, and like um, and also keep that top of mind at any point in time. That is, yeah, that is like there's huge ROI here
Yeah.
when investing in it.
I love that. I think everybody's talking about the financial runway and how to extend it beyond 18 months, and then you need to get another fundraise. But you were kind of spot on. The founder burnout and the mental capacity is limited, right? And it's the burnout is
Yeah,
real. So I think for the folks that are just starting out, it's really important to think about themselves, but also their team, because usually it's just like two, three people, that you're starting with to do regular check-ins and making sure that everybody's aligned and everybody on the same page. But um, I love that. It's a great piece of advice. Well, thank you so much for taking the time and spending half an hour with us today. I really appreciate it.
thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me. This is a lot of fun.